Carol Simmons had a system. It wasn't written down anywhere. Wasn't something she'd ever explain to another person. But it lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. A low, constant pressure that told her to check everything twice, trust nothing at face value, and never, under any circumstances, let anyone see that she didn't already know exactly what was happening. She'd built that system over 41 years of being a woman alone in a world that had decided, repeatedly and without apology, that she was an acceptable target. It started small, the way these things always do. A landlord in Tucson who kept her security deposit and sent a letter full of damage claims that were either exaggerated or invented entirely. A car dealership in Phoenix, where a salesman had looked her straight in the eye and quoted her an interest rate that turned out to be 4 points higher than what the man who came in after her. She'd heard him, negotiating through the thin wall of the financing office, was offered for the same vehicle. A contractor who took half her savings for a kitchen renovation disappeared for 3 weeks and returned the calls of exactly no one. A doctor whose billing department charged her twice for the same procedure and, when she caught it, treated her complaint like a personal attack rather than an accounting error they needed to correct. None of these things individually would have been enough to change a person. But they were not individual. They accumulated the way water damage accumulates, invisible for a long time, and then suddenly structural. By the time Carol was 41, living in a 2-bedroom house in Amarillo, Texas, working as an office manager for a physical therapy practice, she had refined her distrust into something almost elegant. She read every contract. She recorded every verbal agreement in a small notebook she kept in her purse. She took photographs of her car before leaving it anywhere for service. She got second opinions on everything, and third opinions when the second one differed from the first. She was not paranoid. She was educated. There is a difference, and Carol knew it. Even on the days when the vigilance exhausted her so completely that she sat in her car after work and just breathed for a few minutes before she could face going inside. The transmission on her 2015 Honda Accord started slipping in March. She knew what it was before. She took it in because she had looked it up. The way she looked everything up, cross-referencing symptoms across 3 different mechanic forums and one YouTube channel run by a retired automotive engineer in Ohio who explained things without condescension. She knew roughly what it should cost. She knew what questions to ask. She knew which answers would tell her she was being played. She took it to 3 shops before she took it to Danny Garrett's. The first shop quoted her $4,200 and used the phrase significant internal damage twice without being able to show her where the damage actually was when she asked. The second shop quoted her $3,800, which was lower, but the service advisor kept interrupting her when she asked questions, which was a tell she had learned to read years ago. People who interrupt you when you're asking questions are people who don't want you to finish asking them. The third shop was fine, nothing overtly wrong, but when she asked the mechanic to walk her through his diagnostic process, step by step, he looked at her with a particular kind of patience that was not actually patience at all but was condescension, wearing patience's clothes, and she thanked him and left. Danny Garrett's shop was on the eastern edge of Amarillo, not the part of town where the franchise dealerships clustered together, with their bright signage and their complimentary coffee, but the part where the buildings were older and the lots were smaller, and the work was done by people who had been doing it their whole lives. The sign outside was hand-painted, and the waiting area had 4 plastic chairs and a coffee maker that had been there since approximately 2003. Carol had found it through a woman at her office named Patricia, whose husband had been using Danny for 11 years and who said, when Carol mentioned she was looking for a transmission quote, "You want an honest answer or you want a comfortable one? Because those are 2 different shops." Carol said she wanted an honest one. Danny Garrett was 53 years old, heavy-set, with grease that never fully left his knuckles no matter how well he cleaned them, and a way of listening that Carol noticed immediately. He did not look around the shop when she was talking, did not check his phone, did not start formulating his response before she finished her sentence. He just listened. It was such a specific and rare quality that Carol, who had her guard fully raised when she walked in, felt something shift slightly. Not lower, just recalibrate. She told him the symptoms. He asked 4 questions, all of them sensible. He said, "Let me drive it and see what we're actually dealing with before I give you any numbers because I don't quote on guesses. She waited. She drank the old coffee maker's output, which was surprisingly good. She watched through the glass partition as Danny drove her car out of the lot and back in. 20 minutes later, pulled it into the bay and spent 40 minutes underneath it while one of his younger mechanics handed him tools without being asked. The wordless communication of people who have worked together long enough to anticipate each other. He came out wiping his hands and sat down across from her in one of the plastic chairs, which she noted. He didn't stand above her and deliver a verdict. He sat down at her level and had a conversation. He said the transmission wasn't failing. He said the fluid was degraded and there was a solenoid that was starting to go, and that if she drove it another 6 months without addressing it, then yes, she'd be looking at a full rebuild. But right now, today, what she needed was a fluid flush, a new solenoid, and if she wanted, a filter replacement while they were in there. He wrote the numbers down on a piece of paper and slid it across to her. $480. Parts and labor. Carol looked at the number for a long time. She said, "The other shops quoted me between $3,800 and $4,200. Danny nodded like this did not surprise him. She said, "They told me there was significant internal damage." He said there wasn't. He said he could show her if she wanted to come into the bay and look. And the offer was not performative. He was already half standing to take her back there. She said she believed him. She said it and was surprised to find she meant it. He did the work that afternoon. She picked up the car at 5:30. The bill was $492, 12 more than the estimate, because the filter had been slightly harder to access than expected, and he'd replaced a seal he found cracked while he was in there, and he had itemized every dollar of the difference on a printout that he handed her. Without being asked, she stood at the counter, reading the itemized printout, and felt something happening in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. It wasn't relief exactly, though it was related to relief. It was more like the feeling of setting down something heavy that you've been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. That first moment of realizing your arms are empty and your shoulders can drop, and the weight is just gone. She paid. She drove home. She did not sleep well that night, which surprised her. She lay awake in the particular way she lay awake when something was unresolved. Turning it over, examining it. What she kept coming back to was not the money she'd saved, though she had saved a significant amount. What she kept coming back to was the moment. Danny had said there was no significant internal damage, not as a sales tactic, not to make her feel good, just because it was true, and she had come in asking for the truth, and that was what she was owed. She thought about the landlord in Tucson, the car dealership in Phoenix, the contractor who took her savings, the doctor's billing department. She thought about every person who had looked at her and seen an opportunity rather than a person. She thought about how long she had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for someone to simply tell her the truth. She went back to the shop the following Saturday. Danny was in the bay when she arrived, and one of the younger mechanics told her he'd be out in a minute, and she said she'd wait. She had brought something in a cardboard box. The mechanic looked at the box with polite curiosity and said nothing. Danny came out 5 minutes later, wiping his hands, and when he saw her, his expression was pleasant but questioning, not wary, just open, the face of someone who has nothing to hide and no particular reason to be surprised by anything. She put the box on the counter. She said she knew this was probably unusual. She said she'd thought about it for a week and decided she wanted to do it anyway. Inside the box was a meal she had cooked, not because cooking was a grand gesture for Carol, but because it was a real one. Lasagna, because she had a memory of her father saying that the best thing you can give someone is something that cost you time, because time is the only thing nobody can make more of. There was also an envelope, which she slid across the counter separately. Danny looked at the envelope. She said it wasn't the full amount of what she'd saved. She wasn't naive enough to think that was the right gesture. And besides, she'd already planned to use part of it for her daughter's school trip in the fall. But it was $200 in cash, and she'd written a note. He picked up the envelope and she watched him read the note, which said, "I have been cheated by so many people for so long that I genuinely forgot this was possible. I don't know if you understand what you gave me when you told me the truth. It wasn't the money. It was the reminder that I don't have to carry that weight forever. Thank you for being the kind of person who still exists. Danny Garrett was not a man who cried easily. Carol could tell that about him the same way she could tell most things about people. Carefully, from evidence over time. But he stood at that counter for a long moment with her note in his hand and his jaw set in the particular way jaws set when the muscles are working to hold something in. He said she didn't need to do any of this. She said she knew. She said she wanted to.
He looked at the lasagna. He looked at the envelope. He said he was going to put this money toward parts for a woman who'd brought in a car last week that needed more work than she could pay for, and he hoped that was all right. Carol said it was more than all right. She drove home through Amarillo in the late afternoon light, and for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, she did not check the rearview mirror waiting for something to go wrong. She did not review the transaction in her mind looking for the angle she'd missed. She did not feel the low constant pressure in her chest that had lived there for so long she had started to think. It was just part of her. It was quiet inside her on the drive home. Not the quiet of someone who has given up or gone numb. The quiet of someone who has put something down and walked away from it and feels, for the first time, the particular lightness of a person who has decided, not blindly, not naively, but with full knowledge of every reason not to believe that honesty still exists in the world, that it can be found if you know how to look for it, and that when you find it, the right thing to do is not hoard it or be suspicious of it or wait for it to reveal its price. The right thing is to recognize it, to say thank you, and to keep going,